very basics that, or may seem basic, but, you really want to be having it clearly articulated is, what is the problem you're solving for the consumer? How is and I know we always encourage to have some sort of research and discovery around the problem. So being able to understand how it exists, how is it impacting people's lives, what is it clearly, and what value are they losing? And I think that's actually sometimes underestimated to at least articulated on paper versus what we see anecdotally. And the difference there is to add a bit of kind of rigor around exactly what you may want to solve, because the truth is, as you start going through this process of defining it, you'll see there are layers to the problem, but then there are dependencies on the problem itself, on what causes it, how people are able to react or interact with it. And examples are, if we're looking at a let's say FMCG e-commerce that's going to be shipping things into dukkas in different urban areas, let's say. And initially the problem may be that, well, they don't have to shut down and go to the warehouse, and they can get delivered to their store, shop, or kibanda. And then once you start getting into it, one really realizes, well, yes, that's one piece, but there's a cash flow piece that a lot of these dukkas may not have the cash to take delivery that day. So then how do you deal with the cash flow piece? Else you've solved the logistics piece, and then as you do deliveries, you have many failed deliveries, which is actually cost to you. And so really being able to kind of take the journey of the problem is really something that we've seen helps identify the next piece, which is really around product. And so really thinking about, what is a product designed for? Is it designed for a specific need? Are there other products that are enough of a replacement that people may not use this new product? Have we mapped the value proposition, if there is or not the replacement? How will it really change my life as a consumer of your product? And I recognize we're talking about early stage social enterprises, but as social enterprises, we're still developing a product for a type of consumer that may be the bottom 3 quintile, let's say, if we're looking at the different income quintiles, et cetera. But they're still going to be a consumer, which means they're still going to need to feel value to engage and then actually pay, or that they engage and someone else pays for the product, which is okay also. But I think there has to be some clear definition of what you want to build. And again, I'll give an example here is, there are job matching platforms, especially for the services sector, and let's say Fundis. I think everyone probably here has at least need some Fundis. I definitely have, ever since I've been living in Kenya. And people had always thought, well, if they match the Fundis will have more income. They'll be able to access different customers that may not be able to, and people will have verified Fundis and with reviews, etc. What we saw is that product ended up focusing on the technology platform piece, and it missed a lot of the journey of the consumer and how they define what they need, but also the back end, the quality control. And it ended up focusing a lot on, if I just make the technology, people will engage it. And that has been a challenge that I've seen repeatedly. And so while many of us may be looking at tech enabled, I'm not assuming everyone here or who will listen to it is, which is okay, totally. Every business does not need to be tech enabled. But if many of us are, or using some sort of platform or technology, making sure that that's not the end goal. The end goal is the service or product that the consumer gets, and that it's good, so they're willing to pay for it again and again and again. And so I think really understanding, helping define that. And look, for early stage, everything I talk about today is going to be iterative. You're going to look at the problem, then you'll develop a little bit of product, and then we'll go to the next piece, which is market, see where the market fit is, and then have to go back and evolve your problem set, evolve your product, evolve your market, especially if you're growing. And so there's a piece of it that is iterative, but at least having that discipline and rigor to have a loop that says, okay, problem, product, and then what I'd like to really, and this is, again, sections from our investment memo. So I'm very clearly, trade transparent. This is how we look at when we're looking at investments is size and segment. Have you really, has the pitch person really understood the size of their market and the segment? I personally like to start with segment, mainly because size can lead people to be hopeful. People will say, I have a TAM of hundreds of millions. But when you start breaking down the segment, and then you start understanding their profile, their socioeconomic ability, their cash flow, their willingness to pay, your SOM, your serviceable obtainable market, actually comes down to much smaller, which is okay. But as an investor, I'm going to look at, is it big enough for you to grow and be profitable and return me my money, ideally with some extra, right? And going back to the FMCG e-commerce example, and the reason I'm using this, hopefully it's somewhat familiar. We've all heard of the Wasokos, the Boost, that there's multiple examples around Market Force. So hopefully, I think that's something that people can at least it's an equal something that everyone's familiar with. But again, if you profile those dukkhas and you start trying to understand their cash flow, and then you start under the segment, it may inform the types of dukkhas that you want to target, the types of ones the areas you want to target based on your product, which may then inform your routes, which goes back to informing your product. So really, at least having some vision, it could be a one-pager, it could be an Excel sheet that has 3 segments listed, then assumptions on size, and then maybe you go and do a little bit of research, ask some people. I fully recognize that when one is early stage and figuring out MVP or MVP to pre-seed, may not be a lot of money. So I don't want to pretend that this can all be researched with outsourced, but developing a bit of approach and discipline will save actual cash burn and create a bit of focus. If I'll leave it to you on questions. If you want to interrupt, we'll do them at the end. That's fine.
I think you can go ahead with the slides, and then I'll just ask the 5 prepared questions.
Okay, great. So as you see, and this is again our section, we'll look at market. And then what we see is, okay, if you've defined your segments and size, how are you going to capture them? And again, they're articulated. So the key to traction is looking at willingness to pay, and people who are willing to pay recurringly. That's an ideal place to be going into Series A, because that really shows product market fit. But let's say when we say early stage for this discussion, we're even talking seed plus and before for now. Let's say that. So there's going to be at least a discussion on B2C, B2B2C, B to government, depending on your product and what you're doing. And they all have benefits to each, right? And I think as an investor, what I like to see is that the team has done a thoughtful approach of looking at each of those. And whatever decision you made, there's been a trade-off. And you may use both. Frankly, most times a lot of people do. What we may see is early on, as you're looking at your MVP, you may go B2C because a lot of partners may not be willing to work with someone so new, right? If you're just a new product, Absa Bank, well, they're like, okay, we don't have time, excited, right? And so it could be that you try to have enough cash to just onboard some customers to understand how customers interact, etc. But once that is done, or as you're doing that, you may then also try to have partners that have hundreds of thousands of potential consumers, so you can access them through that distribution channel. Of course, that's going to affect your margins. It's going to affect your cost. And can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I got a call on my phone. I turned it off. And so, yes, so I think being able to think about what you want to test during your go-to market. So you have enough of a product now built for pilot. You understand your segments. And now it's like, okay, here are the things we want to learn in this distribution channel, knowing that in the future, each of them has a different growth path. And then you have options. Again, you can change them, you may pivot, but at least having some thoughtfulness is what we look for, because here, especially in any global South market, distribution can be costly. But in many ways, where one is in a market that may have less, let's say, smartphone penetration, more expensive data, or less density if you're doing an ag tech, and farmers are further away than, let's say, certain places and less organized, then your distribution cost could make or break actually your ability to get the next round. And so I think it's important to at least think through it and understand the different channels and say, what are the pros and cons? Now there's, each of these has deeper levels, but when I'm looking at investment readiness, we're actually seeing what's the thinking at least. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. We do want to see the thoughtfulness that there's some discipline around. And then financial. Frankly, if I see that the company is going to be profitable and a $30 million company in year 2, I probably will worry more than if I see that the company is not going to be profitable and need more money. Because the truth is, to grow a startup, if it's VC, that kind of valuation is very difficult unless you're a certain type of model, maybe a fintech in certain large markets like Nigeria, et cetera. And even then, in this macro market, it's much tougher for those valuations, even for those business models. So for us, the financial model is the place that you've put in assumptions on everything we've just talked about. You've put in assumptions on your product, your market, your go-to-market, and that's where I can see your thinking. I can see your assumptions and then see if those assumptions make sense to me and stress test some other scenarios. And so I think it's really try to encourage people to have that. I know it's difficult sometimes. It's hard to invest. We don't encourage necessarily everyone to have a CFO super early. It could be that you outsource someone to help you build a model, and then you have your accountant, but then you plug in the numbers and at least you have a model that you can play with. And then the next section, because I want to save time for us to really have questions and answers, is impact and governance. I put them together, they should be separate, but because we are social enterprises, depending on your investors, they're going to have some piece that's an analysis for their investor readiness that's about impact. So to articulate that how your product or service clearly helps someone improve their resilience or their ability to thrive. And so initially the step or theory of change steps usually are, and they're different by different impact standards. So I've used kind of a general terms here, is that your business model does X or Y or A, however you want to say. That is the output of your activities. That output lets people have access to Y. So it could be, going back to the example, FMCG, let's say Wasoko delivers e-commerce goods to Dukas. That's the output. It gives them ads on a service for BNPL. So the next piece of that is it allows people to have access to goods without losing time. So potential for increased income. And then with BNPL also allows them to potentially have more inventory without having to cash outlay, right? Now that's level 2. The next piece, that if they do those things, then the increased income and ability to have more services can allow them to have access to other services. And so being able to define those steps, depending on the type of social enterprise you are, the type of investors, whether grant, whether or not, they'll have different levels of a theory of change that they may want, but they'll want some vision of how your product has that journey for the consumer. And then governance. I've clearly stated that depending on the business model, et cetera, having a board too early can be cumbersome. Super early pre-MVP, I think at the same time, we do see that are the founders and the team open to having clear governance. So investor calls, are you leveraging experts, just really being able to have some input that is external and helping stress test and think through items. As you're growing and you get to seed plus, starting to prepare to have a board, having external experts that can be non-director experts that could potentially be on your board that can add strategic value from your industry. That's really important. As you get to Series A, Series A investors, if one gets it, will want to form a board. They'll want an X amount of seats, so that's going to be pretty much standard. But it could be interesting to then have a non-director that's still there that is from the industry. If you're in insurance, they understand insurance. If you're in something else, they help. If you're in edtech, they understand education. Again, if you're in FMCG, maybe they were ex-Unilever. If telco distribution is going to be big, maybe they're ex-telco. So I think these types of things can really help bring a different mindset to the board. And I'll stop after the last section, which is the one I think excites most people when we do investor readiness, is fundraising. But the reason I left it last is, especially in this type of macro climate, where it's quite tough. It's tough all around. It's tough for investors to raise money from LPs. Investors have slowed down their investing, which means it's tough, I'm sure, for all of you potentially be fundraising if you are fundraising or thinking about it. And so, when VC became a bit hotter than it should have been, in my opinion, in the last 3 years, everyone thought that they should be going to VC investors. And a lot of the businesses were really interesting, but they may not have been fit for scale for VC. And then they lost a lot of time talking to people. And so I would say one of the things is make sure the type of business you are you low private equity, as in getting some money in year 2, so you can keep growing, but you'll be cash flow positive. I have friends who run businesses like that here, and who run very successful businesses like that. Most businesses in the world are actually like that versus a VC business. Are you scale in VC? Are you SME? So then you really make the right list of investors to talk to, because it takes time. The journey from meeting an investor to close can be anywhere from the lowest, like we've done like 6 weeks, 4 weeks, and we're quite fast sometimes, to 6 months plus. And then of course, there's the usual materials, the pitch, the other materials, creating visibility via conferences, etc. And the last 3, I think, is super interesting. Being able to understand who your lead may be, or building a syndicate. And so how do you understand people's different mandates and be able to try to fit people who may have the same mandate, who also fit what you're looking for and what they may be looking for in a model? Because then you're building some momentum versus just having one investor and having to chase others. A lot of the entrepreneurs have always told me, as you're going through that, if things are starting to look good, you want to create a bit of FOMO and timelines, etc. So you can have investors move if things are getting slower than you need. And then there's negotiations. And for early stage, we've almost always used safe notes or convertible notes. Pricing around gets a bit too complicated because it's so early, it's hard to understand the value and valuations. It's also very legally cumbersome at the, it starts becoming a 3 to 7 week plus process just to get the legal documents done. And many times when you're that early, you actually want the money in much quicker. Whereas a safe note is very clear, find convertible slightly longer, has some interest, but besides that, still both really, promise of future equity. So I'm going to pause here and allow Shirley to, I think she's got some questions, and then we'll take questions from everyone.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for that insightful background into the sort of journey that an investor would look at when preparing to invest in an early stage enterprise. I really like that you have stressed some of the key things that the participants of our matching service have been going through, which again starts with identifying your problem and ensuring that you're able to clearly and concisely articulate that. So I really like that you started off from there. So maybe could you just give me just 1 or 2 examples of early stage social enterprises that you have invested in, if possible? And I guess some of the reasons behind your decision to make that investment, early stage.
So when you say early, the thing is, we are an early stage investor. So when we invest, we are almost always early stage. So, but do you mean a recent one or one that's also grown? So, also, first of all, our portfolio is on our website. So you'll be able to look at our whole portfolio and the companies. And so there's a range, right? So maybe I'll do different sectors. We've done, we are actually an investor in Wasoko. So we're, I think this is 2017, 18. So, quite early stage, a model that was looking to, again, increase income, but also give job opportunities for delivery via the delivery mechanism. And so that was one of our early stage investments. Obviously, I think they've done quite well. But I think a lot of that journey in terms of being rigorous, continuing to reevaluate market and segments, really reevaluating distribution, and in many ways still updating your product a bit as you even grow to keep making it viable and valuable for others who may want to participate. Another company now, these are slightly later, but we invested earlier, and this is an ag tech, and especially I think this market people know is like, I don't know if people know Pula Microinsurance. And so Pula does non-actuarial, so find a way to use index or parameter-based microinsurance for smallholder farmers. So they're tech-enabled microinsurance to really help and reach hundreds of thousands of smallholder farmers to get them insurance around flood, drought, and other items.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I will let you guys just write down your questions in the chat. And then I'll be able to read them from there. But while you're doing that, I'll just ask 2 more questions. Can you provide some insights into your due diligence process when considering an investment for a social enterprise?
Okay, so I mean, I think one, I want to be very fair, and we can all talk openly if we want to. Like, there's a range of social enterprises, right? The definition from when I got into the industry years ago to now has grown, which is great, or it covers a lot. And so we're looking at, specifically for the fund we have, a tech-enabled social enterprise. And so we look at, is it building products and or services for a certain consumer that has less access? And usually those consumers fall in the bottom 3 quintile of income. And so I think we have some flexibility. Some other funds have less flexibility in terms of the type of enterprise they may look at, because they're looking at only a certain sector or a certain type, et cetera. So I think it depends on and this goes back to matching funds, right? Making sure just because they invest in social enterprises, their mandate may not be fit for you, and you may lose a lot of time chasing some of those.
I see one question in the chat. I don't think it will be possible. She says, can you share a sample of a financial model? I don't think that will be possible. I don't know. Would you want to attempt that?
I think it would be difficult because of confidentiality. The other issue is, I can share some of the highlights. I think the other issue is the models are built for different businesses. So they're designed a bit differently. But I think bottom line is, if it's, in that sense, you have a P&L. So you have your revenue, you have your expenses, and then what the bottom looks like after those are all totaled. I think what that drives you through, though, is actually forcing you to look at each of those things and what they will be. And more importantly, as you build your product or as you're thinking about distribution, you'll be able to have a discipline putting your costs in. And so it creates a bit of accuracy. And so I think, and then there's the balance sheet, which is really around what your assets and liabilities are, which is cash plus inventory, plus if you own land, et cetera, depending on your business model. And so I think those are it. I think there are examples of financial models out there that are not confidential to other companies, et cetera. And then the 2 differences are, there's management accounts, which are tracking your current inputs, so revenues and expenses. And there's a forecasting model, which helps you think about what will happen in the future and helps you retest, like, I think we'll sell this to X, Y, and Z, et cetera, and putting all that in, and then monthly being able to compare against that. But I think, I can try to share some examples later, or you may have also, Shirley, that are standard base examples.
Okay, but maybe just to move to the next question, in the interest of time, how significant is a team's expertise and experience in attracting investment, especially for early stage entrepreneurs? Because you cannot pay for the top talent. So how important is a team's expertise and experience in attracting investment?
A lot of early stage funds will say probably anywhere from 50 to 75%. Because we know that most likely you haven't figured out the product. You wouldn't be early stage if you had. And that one is going to have to learn the distribution and all these other things. As long as we believe there's a market and that there's a path to selling the product at profit recurringly, we have to then think about, is this the team to do it? Now, I want to have a nuance on that 50 to 70%. For me specifically, I don't just look at the CV. That, oh, it's a tech company, so they have deep tech or et cetera. Because I think as much as that, and which is why I went through these sections, I want to see a self-awareness. Does one understand the trade-offs in each of these areas that one has to think about when they're building a company? That is as important to me when I look at the team than anything else. Because this is very hard to do. I think all of you who are building things know. And so being able to be self-aware, and it's not about self-aware about like, it's not about what I don't know. Some of it's that. But self-awareness leads to making tough decisions on trade-offs. We're not going to have all the cash to build the product like we want. We're not going to have the cash to distribute every channel exactly from day one. So it's a matter of how do I make those trade-offs? And so I look at, each of those sections that what I said, like, in those sections, that thinking that one does shows me the self-awareness and rigor. So when I ask questions in those sections, I'm really paying attention to those answers. The answers may be wrong, but that's okay. You'll find the right answers later if you have good thoughtfulness.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think it also sort of ties into my next question, because I got asked, how can companies effectively communicate their unique value proposition and competitive positioning? Especially here that there is nothing new under the sun. So what sort of tips would you give to an early stage entrepreneur to competitively communicate their unique value proposition?
I think that goes towards like the section we were talking about in problem. You want to be able to at least solve something that is making a big enough change for people that they're willing to look at your product. And if you do that, then when you do your competitor slide, let's say, you'll be able to show your different competitors and show that you have different pieces of the value proposition. I will also say early on, investors will know what's in the market, and we will kind of know that, okay, there's enough room here, that this still needs to be solved. So I don't know if I would say that needs deep research. I think the way to look at it is, and especially for investors, maybe this is what I really want to be sharing, is for us, we have to think about where you'll be in 7 years when most likely we can get our money out and you can get some of your money out. No, I'm saying like, this is part of the analysis, right? You're an investor and you're going to be building for 7 years. You deserve some money. You deserve to buy your house or whatever, but that means you have to get to Series B. So I have to look at what this product's going to be in 7 years. Who's the competition and what will we build?
I guess, again, that sort of ties into my next question, which is, what approaches have you seen companies, I guess, sort of like Wasoko, used to demonstrate their market potential and scalability? What strategies or approaches have you seen them use to demonstrate their market potential and scalability?
I mean, for early stage, there is, I wouldn't say that there's it's not as much. I think early stage and even later stage, but early stage especially, let's say from MVP to seed plus, before product market fit, it's just being able to show that people buy your product, that you can get the product there. And you may not be able to get it there profitably yet because of costs and other things, but you can get people to rebuy it. Then your Series A investors will help you figure out how to do it profitably. If there's enough margin, or they know that they can get the OpEx cost cheaper with new technology, the product development will become cheaper, or product manufacturing, et cetera, then people will be, okay, we know that this can be profitable and this is a good investment to make. But I think in the end, it's is there value? Do people pay? Will they pay again?
his own military claims responsibility. You see, inconvenient.
I'm sorry about that. We have one question in the chat. When considering a social enterprise, what key things should someone look into when it comes to partnerships?
I mean, partnerships are a very broad term. So I'll say that it can be, if you're talking about grant donors and funders, let's say early grant donors and funders who may give you a grant to help build your MVP because you're you're a social enterprise. Then I think that partnership is understanding their mandate, understanding how it aligns, and then understanding how they will measure your success, because that will determine their ability to be your partner, which means give you money to test and build your MVP. If partnerships is slightly later and you have an MVP and you're talking about telcos or others, it's still similar, but in a different way. It's like, what is their mandate? What is their value proposition? What do they need? One of the more recurring examples is telecom companies. For a long time, obviously, their business was telecom. And now, in many ways, maybe people will say in the industry, they might have been a little bit behind on wallets and mobile money, except Safaricom, let's say, right? In a lot of other countries. And either way, they want to get back to other financial services. And so if you're building something, or if you even have a product that helps SMEs or a product that helps others, they want to bundle your product in, because that will mean that people use more data and buy more bigger bundles. So to understand that the partnership for that telco isn't necessarily a product, it's how it helps them do their business better. And so in the end, I think still looking at partnerships is understanding the value one can bring to the other partner. And then, where's that middle ground? So again, for Grant or other people who are catalytic at the early end of the social and the early prism of the social enterprise scale, I think the value one can bring them is they want to be able to test maybe something catalytic. They want to test something a bit riskier. They want to help a certain segment, right? Maybe it's a rural entrepreneurship, whatever it is, and then being able to see if that fits, and then really being able to then create a message and a proposition for them around that.
James, who is building a microcredit, asks, how do investors assess and manage risks when evaluating their investment opportunities?
Sorry, my internet was a bit cut out. Can you hear me?
Yes. Should I repeat the question one more time?
Yes, if you can. It says, just how do investors assess risk? He's building a microcredit, you said?
Yes. And he's asking, how can you assess and manage risk?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, if you're doing anything in credit, investors are going to look at your ability to manage everything from Forex, if you're doing cross-border or having different currencies, to loan book and loan book risk and NPLs. So any investor is the first thing they're going to go to is map your NPLs. You can say they're at 5-7% now, so non-performing loans, but can you get them down? Why are they at 5 or 7%? There'll be industry benchmarks depending on the type of loans you're doing. There could be 2%, 3%, 4%. Whatever those benchmarks are, they want to see a path to that. It's okay that it's higher than that earlier, but they would want to see. So I think around credit, there's some key metrics that an investor would look
at. Okay, I see Joshua Otieno, your hand is up. Joshua? Joshua? Or would you like to write your question down in the chat? Oh, Marvin, your hand is up. You can go while we wait for Joshua.
Thank you so much, but I have a question here. And what will your advice be for entrepreneurs and particularly founders who usually are emotionally connected to their products or services. And it's because they're social enterprises and they're very obstinate about changing their models or value proposition just because of the attachments they have, or the things they're passionate about and they want to change. Speak something around that and about that.
It's a great question. The delicate answer is, I would say the market may not see the exact same thing you see, and it's not necessarily a great thing. I'm not saying that that emotional attachment isn't valid. It's probably very valid. That the change they want to bring is probably very valid. I think one has to understand when building a social enterprise, we're still building, especially if it's a for-profit social enterprise, we're still building something that would need the market to validate and pay for, right? To help it grow. And so then to be able to take that and internalize it and say, well, what can I build that can still help the same consumer segment that I want to help, but at least I can do it in a scaled way. Else I am building something that may not get off the ground. And so then it's about some self-reflection. This also goes back to exactly why I have those section breakdowns and I really look at self-awareness, right? And being able to see and understand, what is possible versus what I want.
Thank you. And then next would be, what are some of the effective funding strategies that early stage social entrepreneurs should employ to attract investment?
This is a very broad question, so I think it's very tough. If they want to ask a very specific area, it's different. But if you're nonprofit, you're going to have foundations. You're going to have potential smaller grant giving foundations, maybe local foundations. Maybe there's even equity funders. If you're for profit, most likely the journey can start with grants or others to help build your MVP from people who are interested to help it get off the ground. But sooner or later, that journey is going to shift to equity investors, so impact investors. And then, if you get to Series A, it could be a combination of impact investors and maybe some international VCs. And so I think the strategy for each of those is very different. And what they look for is very different. So again, it goes back to matching. Again, that's why I started with that in my slide one, is like matching what you're trying to build with the investor you're trying to get for, and then understand their mandate and what they would need and their agenda. It's okay to say that people have an agenda. Honestly, sometimes people, you may feel like, oh, we're working in trying to build, for the bottom 3 quintile and add and get access and services to people. So that means that either our funders can't have an agenda or we can't have an agenda. But I think that's that almost misleads us and misleads our analysis.
Thank you for that. So somebody told me that a partnership between an investor and an entrepreneur is like a marriage. So what best practices would you suggest to be able to engage and communicate with your investor, with your VC throughout the investment process? Because sometimes you said it takes like 7 years. So what best practices would you like to suggest to early stage entrepreneurs about how to maintain that relationship and to continuously grow it?
So I'd say that any of these relationships in professional have been overblown. I think when we say marriage, I'd say they're like a team. With marriage, it's quasi-family. Whereas to me, it's like a team. So you have to create how you want to communicate. What are the styles that work for each people? And then what are the needs of the team to be able to successfully get to the goal that this team wants, which is a successful business that is having a lot of impact and highly profitable, let's say. If it's a profit-driven social enterprise, even if it's a non-profit social enterprise, you still want to be able to have positive cash flow to be able to pay for everyone, to be able to pay for everyone well, and not need more grants every year, right? That's what grant donors are going to look at. They're still going to see, can you get to a place where you don't need my money by year 3, 4, or 5? And then it goes back to communication. And so going back to, as I said, for early maybe is if it's without, super early, it's like investor calls for profits. I think if it's a grant, people have certain reporting requirements, but it could still be beneficial to create everything from a one pager to something else that's leaner that you can share monthly, not just the every 6 month reporting that you have to send that feels potentially painful, but something that's more iterative that engages your partner to help you problem solve. Most partners do want to help you. If they've given you money, they want you to be successful, right? So they can help you problem solve. So I think creating that relationship and mentality where you're able to communicate clearly the needs, what's going on, and then where you would like help.
Okay, I have one last question and then we will wrap up. Based on your experience, what are some of the common mistakes or pitfalls that early stage entrepreneurs should avoid when seeking investment?
I think I tried to address some of them in the PPT. So I'd say, really try to match what you're building to the investment toolkit, right? So SME investors are different from small private equity, who may still be interested in early stage social enterprises, to venture capital like us, impact investors, right? And so that is the one that I've seen a lot, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, that ends up causing a lot of people frustration and time loss. And so I think really being able to say, okay, what am I building and who are the types of investors that fit what I'm building, which is fine. So I think that is a big thing. And then this is especially, again, the markets where we're in, where the mass consumer is still below 4.5 quintile, right? That's where most of the consumers are. If we look at like the KNVA statistics, everything. Then we want to really understand the customer, not build because this is interesting to build, but build something that people will pay for. And in that comment, pay for includes how do I get it to them at the price they can pay for it. So I think really building for the customer and understanding customer insights, that's also another big one.
Okay, thank you for that. And maybe just one last one that Mercy asks, how do you evaluate a company's exit strategy? And
very good question.
On investment.
And we're impact first investors. So at the same time, it's responsible use of grant capital or any of the capital we get for impact that we would want the business to be successful. So the money we get back, we may be able to use for other social enterprises, right? So we do evaluate exit. We look at, again, if they're realistic. In our markets, especially let's say right now in Africa, we know IPOs are difficult. It's not that easy. People thought everyone would IPO 4 years ago. It's obviously we know where we are now. So I think really thinking about once you get to Series B, are there private equity players? If you're in ag tech, could it be interesting to people in the food systems supply chain? If not, if you're in fintech, are there banks and others who'd be interesting? Understanding other firms or PE firms, but really mapping out people who invest at a much later stage and understanding their dynamic, understanding what they would be looking for. But this goes back to what would the product look like in year 6, 7? And would it be valuable to a huge amount of people? Because then those exit investors will find you because they want a good product to invest in. And so I think that's really starts at looking at what the market would be like at that time, what this could build towards as a product vision. You're not going to have all the answers now. And then being able to see, okay, if that builds towards that, then who would want to buy it and buy us or our share?
Okay, and they keep coming back. Just, I guess, one last one, because you sort of talked about how your partner would like to help you, a partner or investor would like to help you solve a problem. So she asks, what type of support do investors typically provide to companies after an investment is made?
A great question. So, I mean, we're quite active. It's part of our mandate. So we have a pretty robust post-investment platform, and it does everything from customer insights to helping you with your model a little bit and a range of other things. We also help with fundraising. We help with connection with other investors. Different investors do different things. And this goes back to kind of identifying who's the right fit. Even if you identify, oh, these are all VC investors, then you may want to identify, okay, some of these are going to add strategic value. Some of these are going to bring a big check. And that's okay. And you could take the big check from one and then know the other. But maybe if you just have all big checks, then you may not have lots of thought partners at the table, right? So being a balance. So I think it really depends on the investor is the unfortunate answer. Not all investors have the same amount. Not because they're, it's not about good or bad. It's just about their mandate, their ability, and a range of other factors.
Okay, thank you for that. We have 4 minutes to close the session, so I will close it at that. Thank you so much. And I'd really like to extend our deep gratitude to you, Hital, for taking the time to generously share all your expertise with us today. And I do believe that your insights and your different knowledge will all help the participants within our matching service to build more sustainable social enterprises. And I believe that through your insights, they'll be able to unlock doors for investment opportunities. And again, thank you all to our participants who joined us today. Thank you all for taking the time. Thank you all for being here with us. And then I will just leave it to Marvin to just give you the next 2 minutes to wrap it up for us. I feel like my voice has just taken over the whole session. So maybe just someone else from ELF to just come in and say thank you, and we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, Sally. Appreciation to you, Heather. That was very insightful. Sorry, you can hear me? Yes, that was very, very insightful. And I'm sure Shirley may have intimated to us having a bilateral on the side. To discuss a little bit more on some of the things we hope to do at Emerging Leaders Foundation. To our participants, thank you for always finding time to join and log in our meetings. As always, there's something beautiful cooking for all of us. So thank you. Have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning from wherever you're logging in from. Bye-bye. Shirley?
I am a stickler for time, and this is the first time I've been able to close out a meeting before the time. So thank you all for coming, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.